we're talking about the concept of food chain here. Please remember, this will be part and parcel of the structural and functional aspects of ecosystem approach, and this approach is very popular. So we were talking about classification of or types of ecosystems on one hand, and structural and functional aspects of ecosystems on the other. So let's have a look at what we are going to talk about in these structural and functional aspects here. So we have three components here. On one side, food chain, food web, and pyramids, and we have had questions on significance of food web earlier, previous year question, and the type of ecological pyramid, that is a pyramid of energy. These two were previous year questions from this. We'll talk about that. And types of ecosystems, yes, we have few insights into this. So as we discussed earlier, two major ones are what? One on the land. Ecosystems are regions with a balanced amount of soil, water, gases, and living organisms. That's what we discussed earlier. Yes. So we have terrestrial, that is on land, and in water, that is aquatic. This is a very broad and very generic classification. And in that, we were talking about sub-classification of terrestrial ecosystems. So based on what criteria do we classify them? Based on number one, usually altitude, and second one is definitely a very important factor here, that is temperature. The third, associated factor, that is precipitation. So these factors would influence the so-called the limiting factors a lot. Hence, these would differentiate one type of ecosystem to another type. So based on these things, we have classification of terrestrial ecosystems into 5 subcategories. So what are the 5 here? Number one is called as what? The tundra type of ecosystem. Second one is the so-called taiga type of ecosystem, or the coniferous forest type of ecosystem here, or also called as boreal forests or boreal type of ecosystem. And the third one is very popular. What is that here? Very popular forest ecosystem, which is of course of multiple types, and the detailed discussion you will have that in geography, whether it is tropical or temperate, whether it is evergreen or deciduous, whatever. We have subtypes and various examples here. So forest ecosystem. Next would be about here the so-called the grassland ecosystems in general. And then we have extreme. The other extreme is the desert ecosystem. Again, deserts are of broadly 2 categories here: warm deserts and cool deserts, or you call them as what? Tropical deserts and temperate deserts, whatever it is. So based on certain factors, tundra ecosystems are what? These are present at the high altitude. So high altitude, very low temperature, and very low precipitation. So these are tundra ecosystems are characterized by very low temperature, very low precipitation, and usually are found at very high altitudes. And these are again subdivided into 2 types here. Number one would be what? Here Arctic tundras, polar regions, and then alpine tundras. So non-polar region, that means mainland, away from or near the equators or away from the poles here. So alpine, for example, your Himalayan ecosystem, Himalayan mountain peaks, they represent what? Alpine tundras. Whereas polar regions, North Pole, South Pole, they represent Arctic tundras. These are simple examples here. No vegetation, hence most of the organisms are carnivores here, and the diversity is very less, and you know that they practice hibernation. So this was also a previous question. What is hibernation? Hibernation is a change in the physiological response to unavailability of food because of extreme environmental conditions, and is characterized by decreasing the metabolic rate, thus decreasing energy requirements during the extreme or harsh polar winters. For example, polar bear. It follows what? hibernation. It's a very simple phenomenon here. And organisms in tundra regions are characterized by what? Short limbs and a large or big torso. Why? To store more fat. Fat acts as insulator, thus prevents heat loss. So reducing surface area of the body, because of which they have short limbs and big large torso. They store more amount of fat. Fat in the body acts as insulator to the heat and it prevents loss of heat. Thus they maintain bare minimum, that is required temperature, core body temperature. Okay, so we have these characteristic features of tundra. Next is what? Taiga ecosystems, which are present on mountain slopes. Definitely, relatively speaking, relatively high altitude relative to others, higher altitudes, and moderate amount of precipitation. And these ecosystems are challenged. They are challenged by the unavailability of water because of slope, gravity. Water has a tendency to follow runoff, and there is no stagnation of water. Hence, they suffer from scarcity of water and few minerals. Hence, what happens here? So, usually these types of taiga ecosystems are also called as coniferous. Why coniferous forests? Because you see conifers. What are the examples here? Spruce or fir, depends how you pronounce it, or junipers. For example, we mentioned earlier, yes, redwood trees, or so we have some kind of pines also. Pine or spruce or the kind of junipers, yes, or redwoods. These have characteristic features. For example, leaves are modified to become what? Spines, and flowers modified to become cones. Because these trees bear cones, they are also called as conifer. Fir means to bear. Fir means to bear, to hold, to showcase, bear. Cone, why? Why spines in the place of leaves and why cones in the place of flowers? It is a modification. We call it as adaptation because of long-term phenomenon. To conserve water. Why should they conserve water? Because these trees or forests are present on mountain slopes. Slope means there is a scarcity of water. They have to conserve water. So how? So they have to prevent the surface area of the leaves, thus prevent transpiration and number of stomata. Yes, and they modify its spines, and flowers also, they need a lot of moisture. Moisture means water. So to conserve it, cones. So that is just one type of modification, and they are also shaped like a cone shaped. Often they are called as Christmas trees. Why? To just allow the snow or water to fall off in general. So we have this, and then of course to conserve water, again that is one element here. So these are few aspects of taiga or boreal or coniferous forest present on the mountain slopes in general. Next will be your forest ecosystems. Forest ecosystems are important for us because not only they are very significant concern with the biological diversity, but also they have a lot of uses as the resources for human beings, and they also protect the soil and moisture here. So a lot of benefits out of these forests here, and unfortunately the developmental activities they destroy. We have to. So that means we are causing deforestation and we call it as development, and there is no other way. And we are using the forest products, whether timber or non-timber, as raw materials for our domestic, that is household or industrial requirements. We know that. So these are certain kind of forests here. And then we have the so-called grassland ecosystems. So we have had a question about grassland ecosystems. We have tropical grasslands and then we have temperate grasslands. So one important aspect is what? Grassland, as you know that these are dominated by grasses. These grasses, they grow abundantly and they prevent the growth and development of trees. This was a previous question. Why you don't see much trees in grassland ecosystems? Options were like what? Excessive sunlight, scarcity of water. We have a lot of options, but the appropriate option as per the key was what? So these grasses are resistant to these kind of fires, to prevent fires, but trees cannot withstand. Yes. So that is one option here. We have had a question earlier. Yes. Grassland again. So this is one type of terrestrial ecosystem here, grassland ecosystems with a unique type of biodiversity. And next would be about the last type of terrestrial ecosystem, that is desert. Again, we have these, tropical, that means warm deserts. For example, India has both. For example, warm desert, we have Thar desert, and cold desert, we have the Ladakh region, Leh Ladakh region in Jammu and Kashmir. Okay, so we have these two types here. Again, these, are characterized by extreme temperatures. For example, relatively tropical deserts have high temperature and low precipitation, and temperate deserts have the low temperature and low precipitation. Usually they are not characterized by being at a very high altitudes. They are not present at very high altitudes. Okay, so these are certain types of terrestrial ecosystems. And then next would be about what? Your aquatic ecosystems. Aquatic ecosystems are broadly divided into freshwater ecosystems. We have saline or brackish water ecosystems here, and then we have the so-called marine ecosystems. How do we classify? Basis what do we classify? These based on salt concentration, based on salinity concentration, or based on the sodium chloride concentration. No, we are not saying that sodium chloride is the only salt in water. We are not saying it, but majority or abundant, or the parameter we take usually to classify aquatic ecosystem. Usually it is measured as what? Freshwater ecosystem is the one which has a salt concentration which is equivalent to or less than 0.5 grams per liter, or also called as parts per thousand. Lesser than 0.5, that means bare minimum salt concentration. And saline or brackish ecosystems have excessive, that is from 3.5 grams per liter, and they can be up to 10 grams per liter or higher. Saline or brackish ecosystems, aquatic ecosystems. And marine ecosystems have these salt concentrations up to 34 parts per thousand or grams per liter. And rarely we have, because life cannot survive in such ecosystems, brines. What is the brine here? Brine is what? Around 45 parts per thousand or grams per liter. This very high concentration. Why life is not possible in aquatic ecosystems with high salt concentrations? You know that osmosis process we discussed earlier. If you remember, what happens during osmosis here? Water moves from low solute to high solute. That means if you try to put any living organism in the brine, what happens? That becomes dry from inside. Even if you keep a human being here, that human being becomes dehydrated and dies very soon because of osmosis. So that is why life is not possible. If there is no life, that cannot act as an ecosystem. Hence, we don't consider brine. What are the natural brines here? Natural brines are what? You know that why brine ecosystems form here, or brine aquatic, or water bodies form? Excessive evaporation, resulting in concentration of salts in general. Number one. Number two, less drainage and stagnation and larger surface area exposing the water to sunlight. That means you in tropical regions here. Yes. And then salt mines will be there. In that, definitely sodium chloride is mines. Yes. So salt pans, for example, you go to Kutch region of Gujarat, you can see brines, natural. Often it is called as white desert. Salt pans, they are naturally formed salt pans, and then you mine salt from there and you will see brine. But life is not possible here, hence we don't consider this as a proper aquatic ecosystem, because life is not possible here. So that's how we have this. And within freshwater we have moving freshwater and stagnant freshwater, because moving freshwater will have a different type of flora or faunal composition, and stagnant freshwater will have a different floral and faunal composition. Flora means plants, fauna means animals. Pretty simple. Yes. So that's the difference we have here, and then we will talk about them one by one. Especially we will focus about them in biodiversity topic. Yes, not here. So Getting back, we discussed about types here, and then we'll be talking about the structural and functional aspects of ecosystems here. So that is what we'll be talking about here. So structural and functional aspects. So what are the topics we need to cover here, because this is the most important or significant one here. One, fundamentals would be in the form of what? The concept of food chains, the concept of food web or food webs, or concept of ecological pyramids proposed by Charles Elton. You know that, hence they are also called as Eltonian pyramids. That was the previous question. Yes. So we have three things here. Next we'll be talking about something called as the biotic interactions. Significant because we do get questions from this. Biotic interactions, like positive biotic interactions, for example, mutualism or commensalism. Negative biotic interactions like amensalism, predation, parasitism, competition, and neutralism. We have some. We'll talk about with examples. Examples are the important things here. Through examples, you explain. Next is what? Biogeochemical cycles, relatively important here. So because they talk about nutrients and movement of nutrients here, yes, in a cyclical fashion. And we talk about the gaseous nutrient cycles and sediment. So when we talk about gaseous here, we have water cycle, oxygen cycle here, and very important ones are carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle. On and off you get questions on these both. Yes, carbon and nitrogen cycle. Sediment cycle will be what here? Phosphorus cycle and the so-called the sulfur cycle. So what is important here is the reservoir, how it moves into living organisms, that is food chains, and how it is deposited back, and what is the biological significance, why we call them as nutrients. These two are important points you have to observe in these two cycles. Yes, and one is very important, that is the role of microorganisms in nitrogen cycle, because it is largely naturally microorganism mediated, largely, if not completely, because lightning also does, and the fertilizer manufacturing process uses electrical energy also does, but 80 to 85% of nitrogen cycle is mediated by soil microorganisms. Hence that becomes important. Which microbe does what, or what are the different steps, and why it is called as nitrogen fixation? Because ammonification, nitrification, denitrification are the steps on which we have had not only preliminary questions but mains questions also. Just be aware of it. Once we are done with this, we'll have a concluding topic of chapter 1, that is ecological succession. Ecological succession. So these are the topics which are present in the first chapter. So that's what are significant, and many questions are asked from this. Okay, let's get back to this. What do you mean by food chains and food webs here? In general, as we discussed earlier, we discussed about food chain already. What is that here? So it is a linear graphical representation of relationship between plants and animals, largely among animals, with the nutrition or energy as the link, and is characterized by eating and being eaten as one type of relationship here. So food chains are diagrammatic or graphical representation. We don't have chains, please understand this. These are like imaginary, yes, only for education and research purposes, to understand them better, that's all. There is no other purpose here. Linear interrelationship or interaction among all living organisms or biotic communities within an ecosystem here, characterized by eating and being eaten. And food chains usually are of two types, as we mentioned earlier. Number one is what? Grazing food chain. Another one is, we discussed about them already. It is not something brand new to you. And somebody said this is a revision class. Yes or no? So you should not be surprised about whatever is being discussed here. It's a kind of, you're doing it again multiple times. Nothing should be shocking or surprising to you. Yes. So grazing food chain starts with what? The plants or grasses being consumed by herbivores first. Herbivores are consumed by your carnivores, and carnivores are further consumed by apex predator, and this linear representation and directional movement of energy across various trophic levels. That is what we mentioned earlier. Trophic level, you know, because we mentioned about them earlier. Energy or nutrition. So from producers to consumers, energy moves, not the other way. From consumers, energy doesn't move to produce. So that means plants are self-sufficient. They can produce their own food. It is the animal or animals which need other organisms for their survival. Okay. So energy moves, and this link is, which is nothing but here, energy or the nutrition or food in general. And then organisms are related to each other as eating and being eaten, and that is what is the characteristic feature of the concept of food chain. Food chains are pretty regular in almost all ecosystems, and that is what makes it a community. And ecology is characterized by interactions among living organisms. If organisms are not interacting with each other, they cannot be studied under the heading of ecology. Like society, you know, in society, it is not just presence of humans, a group of human beings in one area in a given particular time period. That doesn't constitute a society. Then what constitutes a society? Relationships, which are cognizable, meaningful, purposeful, and mutually aware. People know who they are to others and who others are to them. Only then they form a society, not just a group of people. For example, if we are commuting by bus, all passengers, do you think they constitute a society? No. Train, people, no. Aircraft, they don't constitute a society. Though group of people are present at the same place at the same time, they don't constitute a society. Then who? On what basis? You know that. Similarly, ecology or ecosystems. Ecosystems are communities. And what is important is not mere presence of living organisms belong to various species in a given region at a given point in time. Rather, their interactions, their interdependency, their relationships, how they influence each other, and of course their surroundings, physical surroundings. This is what is the characteristic feature of ecology. Ecology is not just about living organisms. That becomes botany or zoology, you know that. You study plants, botany. You study animals, zoology. And why you call it as ecology? Or only physical surroundings? Geography you study. Only physical surroundings. That means the topography, geomorphology, oceanography, and climatology is geography. Plants, botany. Animals, zoology. Then from where did you get ecology? It's not about separate or individual components of a given region. And how do you understand them? Together. When do you say together? Not mere presence. Rather, interaction, mutual influence, and together, what do they constitute? So that is what is important. Relationships are more important than mere presence of individual actors. So that is what is essence here. If they are not interacting, it's meaningless. It is not ecology. So that's how it is. So energy is the link, and eating and being eaten is the action or relationship here. And a linear representation and directional flow of energy is what is the characteristic feature of food chain. And grazing food chain usually is seen in terrestrial ecosystems here, very popular. That is, grasses or plants are consumed by primary consumers or herbivores, and these are consumed by secondary consumers, that is carnivores, and these are consumed by tertiary consumers or apex predators eventually. That's how this chain goes in general. Next is what? Detritus. Detritus means what? Dead and decaying organic matter of either plant origin or animal origin or both. Yes. So usually these are consumed by microorganisms. So macronutrients are converted into micronutrients, and the breaking of bonds yields energy. That energy is consumed by fungi and bacteria, and they multiply, and they in general along with soil nutrients will be consumed by insects. Insects are consumed by again birds or amphibians or reptiles, and then they are consumed by birds and higher organisms, and the chain goes on. So that is detritus, because the first step is the consumption of detritus by microorganisms. Hence the chain is called as the detritus food chain in that way. So food chains.